So one example is around self-belief. I think when I went on this journey in the business, and I asked myself this question once. A friend asked me, "Why are you always running?" And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? I actually am always running.
Are you a conscious leader or a visionary or a thought leader in this world? And would you like to create some of your own content in collaboration with us? If so, please head over to theatlasofconsciousness.com to check out more of our video and production content. We would love to work with you to get more of these new Earth messages out into the world. Thank you once again for listening. And now, on to the episode. One day in the future, there'll be enough
That's all right. I'll roll blind.
technology to... We're getting advanced, though. Look at this. It's getting better. Be aware that keep your hands off the table.
Okay.
Yeah,
But even that drumming session before won't help.
Don't drum during the podcast. All right, we ready? Can I intro it?
Yeah.
This is the Atlas Emotion Series, where we share edge of the earth ideas for a new world. Hello everyone, and welcome to another Atlas Emotion Series podcast. My name is Ella, and I've got an amazing episode for you with my friend Reg Raghavan, who's sitting here next to me. We'll be doing a podcast which is going to be really interesting. It's called Nadi Therapy, and Reg is a practicer of this new, evolved kind of therapy that really gets us to look deeper at our sort of ancestry and what may be playing under the surface of our daily experiences. For example, you know, we may be feeling blocked in certain areas, or like certain areas are not flowing. We're going to be going straight into that. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be here.
We got a bit of forest in the foreground here. That was Reg's idea.
Just to brighten things up a little bit.
Yeah, bring the forest to us. So as I developed the Atlas, I connected with Reg a few years ago, basically for business support. And what was interesting about the questions, I would come to him with very stock standard questions. You know, I want to market my business, I want to expand it. And he would give me not stock standard answers, like have a look at where I was putting my focus and have a listen and spend my time listening to my own podcast, spend my time looking at my daily interactions and understanding the place they may be coming from, as well as, you know, recently I asked him, I was considering getting someone to help with marketing, and a very unconventional answer that I potentially talk with my mum about when she gave birth to me and her pregnancy. So these are, I mean, it's all incredibly fascinating. And at points I started to understand the depth of what was going on here. And it's much more about our greater evolution and our lineage. And it's not, you know, we sort of take everything on board as individuals and assume it's all about us, but it's really about us and the ecosystem and our history. So do you want to introduce us to Nadi therapy and a little bit of a summary on your perspective and journey with it?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing I'll say is it's not something I've created. It's actually something I'm building on the work of others. And I think in this space, it's important. I've spent a lot of time learning from so many different teachers. And so I want to acknowledge all of those teachers who have, given me insight into my own journey. But it has been my own journey, which has evolved this. But in particular, I'll just like to say it's based off the work of Dr. Angela Longo and Master Mantak Chia and a range of other healers and practitioners and teachers. So what is Nadi therapy? So Nadi therapy, and I'll go into the meaning of Nadi, but Nadi therapy is really for me a framework in which to view yourself so that you can have a bit more perspective, so zoom out a little bit. So imagine Google Maps and you just zoom out of your daily life and daily problems, zoom out a little bit and view yourself in a different way, and then be able to resolve, reprogram. So understand, resolve, and reprogram blocks essentially that are there. So it's based off the notion that, we a lot of people talk about manifestation and getting into a state of manifesting things, visualizing, oh, I want this, I want to run a business, I want to be in this kind of relationship, etc. And that's fine. People can build that level of visualization. What I found over time is it's really hard to sustain if you just hack it together and create that visualization. And so I asked the question, what is the thing that's actually, why is it not sustainable when you do that? So, Tony Robbins and all these guys that are kind of teaching business leaders to visualize where you want to be. And a lot of people do that and then they get a bit disappointed when it doesn't sustain itself. And so I realized there's a second variable here, and that's not only what you aspire to, but what's pulling you away from that. And what's pulling you away from that could be a block, or it could just be a pattern that's playing out. So Nadi, if we go into that, Nadi is a Sanskrit term for the 72,000 points in your body that facilitate the energy flow through the body. And in the Chinese system, they might call it the meridians. And I haven't, so that's a cognitive thing. I've learned that from a secondary source. But I do feel vibrations, and I do feel the energy, and I can feel the Nadi flow. So when you're in flow, things are in sync, essentially. So this is all about being in flow, what state of mind you need to be in flow, and what are the things pulling you away from being in flow. And most people know when you feel good, but most people don't know what are the set of variables or set of conditions that help you to get to that stage. So an example could be like a rainbow. There's a set of conditions for a rainbow to appear. So that's like the concept of emergence, essentially. Once you know, we think, oh wow, the rainbow's appeared. It's magic. It's come from the gods or whatever. But actually, if you know the set of conditions, you're at a certain altitude. It's rained the night before, etc., etc. Then these things become a bit more predictable. So this is really a framework to understand your own set of conditions that enable flow.
So when we were originally talking about this podcast episode, we talked about calling it the masculine and the feminine family tree. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why we would be addressing your, Nadi therapy in that way?
Yeah, sure. I think my experience has been there's generally for flow and for balance, there's generally an integration of some kind of duality that's required. So in music, for example, it's rhythm and melody. And yes, there's a third, which is lyrics, but you don't always need lyrics for a good song. So if we look at rhythm and melody, when those two come together, this kind of concept of emergence appears again, a third space, a special space. And it's the same in terms of masculine and feminine. When everyone has a mother, father, in terms of as a child in birth terms. So there's this concept of feminine and masculine. So at that layer, there's different layers of abstraction. It's not meant to go too much into gender and be too prescriptive about what those things mean. But generally, flow happens when you've got an integrated space.
So can you just tell me a little bit about the family element of the masculine and feminine family tree? What's the family aspect of this?
If you zoom out, we spoke about zooming out and giving ourselves perspective. And imagine, for example, so we say that there's like 6 characters inside you. So if you zoom out, 6 characters inside you. So imagine Friends as a show, for example. You've got Joey, Rachel, Phoebe, Ross, etc. And if you're the director, and to write a great script, you need six characters. And when you map out that script, there's 10 or 12 interrelationships in that script between each character, and that's what's made it a great show. So in this context, we zoom out and we say there's six characters within you. So your feminine, essentially your mother figure, your father figure, your feminine figure, your masculine figure, and then your feminine child and masculine child. So if you then look at yourself in that context, and you'll see that there's 10 to 12 interrelationships that play out. And while it's a little bit more of a complex framework to start with, it actually makes everything a lot easier to understand. You know, why you keep dating the same kind of person, why your business keeps failing, why you make money and then suddenly lose money. You know, once you start realizing this pattern, it keeps playing out around you. And why family trees? Because you'll start to see that this has an ancestral link, that your father's pattern or your mother's pattern is actually quite similar. So you can start to map this over time. And it's kind of like a camera. We've got a camera here today, but it's shooting in auto versus manual. If you shoot in manual, you're playing with aperture and exposure and all sorts of different ISO levels. So this is really a bit more of a manual way of hacking yourself to understand what's going on. So in the same way, it's a bit more complex to learn how to use a camera manually compared to in auto. But once you learn it, you've got the tools to really understand that. And maybe the IT example is, or programming example is, it's like writing your own script, an open source platform where you can reprogram yourself, as opposed to using scripts that other people have written. So right now, people go to gurus or they go to teachers, and they often absorb their learnings, which is secondary learnings. This is all about you have the answers within you, and hacking your own script to find those answers.
So let's just talk about where this has emerged from. When we were just talking before the podcast, you mentioned that there was a passion for flow when you were 16. So can you tell us a little bit of how you've arrived at Nadi therapy through your journey of spirituality?
So I think as I said, I was always interested in flow. I was interested in business actually, and getting involved in business and contributing to the world in some way. And that made me think about flow. All the business leaders were talking about that at the time. And then I think at the same time, it's your life experience that just creates these circumstances. So it could be relationships, could be business, could be your family. So for me, it was a combination of those things that led me to search for different techniques. And maybe the earliest I remember is having an out of body experience, sitting on a bus in year 8 and just kind of looking down on myself. And I think that may have made me think, how is that even possible? But made me look at myself in a different way. I think I was always aware of my empathic nature. I was kind of strong analytical, but also very emotional as well. And so I think it was a way to manage emotions. I think during relationships when I was younger, I started thinking about that a lot more. And then I realized that this integration of thinking about it and feeling into it was a thing. And I think that manifested then in singing, I think, where I, really got a sense. I was singing early, but it wasn't until I started learning Hindustani classical music, where they're really big on improvisation on one hand and then rhythm on the other hand, some really complex cycles of rhythm cycles, and just this amazing space that comes together when you're improvising. So jazz scatters would feel the same thing. This space that comes up there, and so I think that made me think about this kind of dual nature of things. Then I set up a social enterprise focused on kind of cultural marketing, and in that experience, I could see the reflection of myself in the business, and I realized, what I'm attracting and what I'm enabling in the business is a reflection of myself. So I started seeing those patterns. And I met a friend there, Sunny Forsyth, who introduced me to Master Mantak Chia out in Thailand and the Taoist method. And so I went out there, and out there I just felt very comfortable. There was a lot of people flying in around the world with similar experiences or curiosity, and how to manage your energy. And then my first trip out there led me to a Kundalini rising experience, which I had no idea about. Had not been aware of that as a concept. I'd read about it, I just didn't understand it. And it was really based on all the chakras in the body, the energy system opening up, and there was a rocket feeling going through my body, and I got to experience in a moment this connectedness to universe in that moment. So that really was encouragement to keep going on the journey, in terms of the curiosity around what flow means, and what can result if you're consistent.
So, do you have an example from your journey of how you may have been blocked in business or in your life and you've applied your own method or applied Nadi therapy to clear it? Walk us through, what do you look at, and yeah, how do you pull it apart and move into that next stage of flow?
So one example is around self belief. I think when I went on this journey in the business, and I asked myself this question once. A friend asked me, why are you always running? And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? I actually am always running. I'm running. I was running from airport to airport, running from project to project, and this was as my spiritual journey was moving along, and I was almost running like I didn't believe in myself. And so this concept of self belief came up, and I was really thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? But I do believe in myself. I feel like I've done a lot of work in this space. So I took some time out. I went to Africa. I went to Tanzania. I was sitting in the not the Serengeti, in Ngorongoro crater, and I was looking at Kilimanjaro from a distance, and I remember contemplating this and realizing that years ago, I when I first got into business, I got into it because I was trying to prove something to myself, and then I just had a pattern that kept on going. So even though I had evolved, I was still behaving in this old pattern. And
What was the pattern? Just talk us through that.
the pattern was, I think, I was these days men don't have an initiation ceremony, a formal one. So really, it's up to your own devices to prove yourself and prove your sense of worth. And for me at that time was around, I just had an innate drive to be successful in my work. At that time, it meant, you know, interesting social projects. It meant making money. It meant meeting good people, and just advancing in my career in general. That was no longer true for me. I wasn't yearning after money in that same way. I wasn't yearning after any status or, having to. I felt like I had proved myself. I felt confident that if I was given any task, or I chose to do anything, that I, I I could do that. So I knew that I was running, but I didn't have a mechanism to understand. I was a bit confused because I thought, but I do believe in myself. So, and I felt like I'd resolved that, but why am I running? And then I realized that actually it comes back to these six characters I mentioned before. That one part of me, the masculine side of me, has self worth, believes in himself, and trusts himself, and is working on the challenge of loneliness. But my feminine side was a bit further behind in that perspective, has self worth, but didn't fully believe herself. So this was kind of a residue of that, and an incongruence between my masculine and feminine. So the moment I realized that, the moment I shone some light there, I was able to separate it, and identify exactly which part of me was running and why I was running. Yeah, so once I realized that that was attributed to my feminine side, the lack of self belief, I started to see patterns, and it would have been in my sisters, or in feminine aspect of me around me, similar kinds of things. So people would come to me, for example, or they'd either be running or they'd come to me and they'd have some self-doubt.
Just to clarify, what does masculine and feminine mean to you in this context?
In this context, masculine for me represented the action, doing side of me. It also represented in my family line the my father's path, actually. And when I actually mapped this out, I realized that he had a similar path. So he had a business at one stage, and then he was running. And then when I spoke to him, he said my grandfather was the same. And so I started to see patterns in that familial line, but also and also in my feminine line. So on the mother's side, I could also see some of those patterns playing out.
So I think this actually ties into what I wanted to ask next. Why do you believe that? Why is this method or way of seeing ourselves important for everyone listening? And why is it important as a collective as well? Because there's this element in what you're talking about that is about evolution and ancestry and what surrounds us, not just us as individuals.
Yeah, I think at the heart of this is what I'd mentioned earlier, which is it. Everyone, we have our own answers, and this really gives you the strength and the power to take that power back in a way, or realize that those shifts can happen immediately and they can happen within you. Yes, we need guides. We may need some help. We may need some blessings from people. We may need support from others. But ultimately, we make the decisions for ourselves and we have all the answers. So I think it's super important as individuals to have that and know that, because if you look at mental health, or you look at it's when you feel trapped, that people usually go southwards, when you feel like you don't have a path to move, to then give you the power to say, actually, you're choosing that, and this is how you're choosing that. That's super important.
And it's often a lot more complex and detailed than sort of the surface level. I'm choosing that. It's the patterns that have played out, is my experience of when we've talked through.
And yeah, it's not that sometimes it's not in our control, in the sense that things have happened to us outside of our control. But even that is, the lesson to learn how to work beyond that when you don't have that control or something's happened. So if something happens traumatically as a child, um, giving perspective as to which aspect of you has been traumatized, and then nurturing that. So, for example, a little boy who might be traumatized, or a little girl who might be traumatized, the cognitive function hasn't developed in their brain to deal with that. So it often stores itself in the body somewhere, in cellular memory, or deep. There's an emotional feeling, and to access that, you need to understand what's happened and which part of you has been traumatized, and then once that's acknowledged, then you can heal yourself in that process and find a way to heal that.
So I think just to make it clear what the method is, we're gonna use me as an example, and me and my real problems as a real world example. And I actually felt to talk to Reg about something I was just talking to him about on the phone. Oh, I always talk to him about this. What am I talking about? Usually talking about marketing in some way, because he runs a business in marketing, but also there's this really amazing spiritual element, this element we're talking about now, which is the ancestry, and how my patterns are playing out. The patterns I don't even, there's, even though I've done so much work, there's still this subconscious patterning that plays out through my life, and how can I look at that and face these blocks. And sometimes it's so deep that I even witness myself blanking as we're having these conversations, because it sort of gets to the crux of it, gets right to the point of, instead of I need to do, get 100,000 more subscribers, it's I need to talk to my mother, and I need to address the trauma, that, those kinds of things. So I might just, come to you with what I did last week, which I said I wanted to have the Atlas reach more people, and essentially to market it further. And I said,
if it doesn't happen now, it'll happen later.
yeah, it's just not the right timing. That's what we talked about. We talked about timing, which I feel, this is why it's so fascinating for me, because I feel like I'm really in tune. And I said, well, it just doesn't feel like the right time. And then, I've just been pretty set on that. And then I spoke to you about it, and you brought up a counterpoint and started to make me investigate. Really?
I think I remember
Yeah.
when you said it, because you said, when I speak to you, I often feel torn because you say things with such conviction. And when I feel into it, I think, actually, yeah, that is quite intuitive, and that does sound real. So I think in this case, you said, I felt into it, and I think it's going to happen later. And I thought, I thought first, initial reaction was she's deflecting, and then after that, I thought, hang on a minute, but I felt into it. It sounded really real and authentic. And then I thought, why is this conflict existing? And then I realized I used the method to think about it. So I separated it out, and I thought, your feminine side is actually, you've done a lot of work on that, and you are intuiting on that side of it. But on the masculine side, it seemed non-existent. It seemed like it was almost not there. And what I meant by that, I'm not saying the masculine wasn't there, but the feminine side didn't appear to acknowledge his existence. So you've got this scenario where you're intuiting, but then I felt that that's half the answer. So you're intuiting half the answer essentially. So, and the deflecting aspect of it was around time, and then I thought about time in terms of structure.
What is what is him in this example? What is the masculine in this example?
Yeah.
What did you feel was non-existent?
In this case, I looked at it just in terms of timing, and structure. So in terms of, and I asked a musician friend of mine, I just kind of gather some data with different people and asked a musician friend of mine, as a musician, what would masculine creativity mean to you versus feminine creativity? And his response was, well, masculine creativity was really about, the rhythmic element of my practice, the discipline of practice, the beats, and the feminine side is not having that and just flowing, having a structure, but flowing within that structure.
That's amazing to hear it that way, because I feel like I really connect with that. Just this morning I was meditating, and I heard you would benefit from greater structure in your life. So, and it's exactly what you're talking about. My greatest creative practices as a producer is when I enjoy it. I have a lot of, structure there, and that allows me to just rock up. I say to myself, you're going to rock up at 9 a.m. You're going to produce this podcast, and then you'll edit it by this time. And it allows me to have the framework to rock up and just see what's there. And yeah, I recognized in my life recently that I saw that my calendar was messy. There's just so many different activities and things going on. And even though I have a sort of high level framework of what I want to achieve by the end of the year, my daily practice was a bit messy. And so that's what came up this morning. You would benefit from an even greater structure. So almost like, like a class, like, set out your day and then just turn up. I had this thing of, I want to write, I had the idea to write songs like every second night. And what if I just set a creative meditation for myself where I rock up at 8 p.m. every second night, just see what's there. But you have the dude, the masculine saying, but you told yourself, just turn up. And obviously to be easy on it and not have to be forceful. But for me, especially with the creative practice, it allows for greater freedom, because I find I appreciate that I've said to myself, I'm going to turn up, and then I am, and I'm being easy and non-judgmental. And then I feel good, at the end of the week, because I feel like I have showed up as much as I could, and whatever was there was there. It's like the practice of, I started meditating 5 years ago. My whole life has changed. I told myself at the time I wouldn't miss a day of meditation from because I had such a context for how terrible it can get without it. And it's just everything's changed. But I never had an expectation on what the meditation needed to be. Initially, it was to get healthy, and then it's just evolved to huge levels of creativity, and then now it's just become like a blossoming life where I just get ideas and business ideas, ideas for creativity, ways to fix my daily structure, ways to resolve relationships. So yeah.
I think the more integration you have between those the elements, and the elements as we were mentioning before can change and can be different for different people, but the the more that integration happens, my experience is the more of that great stuff happens.
So just coming back to the original example, we were talking about, I came to you with a marketing issue and I said, yeah, but it's not for now. It's for later on. It's for a few years. And you went, oh, that's interesting. That's not what I'm intuiting. And do you want to just talk us a little bit through, I thought I was being so intuitive, in tune with timing and stuff, but I was missing something. What was missing there?
So I felt then essentially there was a time-based issue because there was a deflection to the future. And I thought, if you've got this problem now, why are you deflecting to the future? Why is this a future thing? And especially the kind of time period you talked about was 2 years or something big. So it was really to give yourself a bit of room. And then intuitively, it just felt like there was an integration issue here between your feminine intuitive with the masculine, and that there was a big differential. And so that's where I think we explored that a little bit more. So the feminine intuitive was really the feminine wisdom, and the feminine wisdom is really your mother, your internal mother. So we took that representation, and I thought, because you're starting a business here, you've got this business, you're growing it. So that's when I think I asked you about, what did your mother go through in the first few years of your birth, because that was an analogy for the feminine wisdom struggling to understand how to grow it to its next level and being received as a bigger child. So I thought that immediately made me think about you in the early years, and particularly what support then was happening on the masculine side. And so I had a hypothesis that maybe that support from your dad wasn't there at that time, and he was absent, or it was kind of projected into the future in the way that you were talking about it. And that's when I asked you, what was your mother's experience of that?
Yeah, so I would just say you just nailed it. I feel like that's sort of my backstory, that it's that my mom hasn't felt supported by my father. Yeah.
So then, as an antidote to that, and to not go into the kind of the details and necessarily the trauma of it, but it's really about nourishment. So to heal that, part of it, that's why we went from a marketing problem to maybe you should just talk to your mum and ask her what her experience was when she was going through that when you were a child. And intuitively and naturally, I thought that might provide some healing, some understanding for yourself. Because in this case, you're your business. As a child, you're the business that's growing. And for that not to be impacted in its growth, you want to then talk to that feminine wisdom to give you insight as to her experience. And then if you hear her and hear her story, then that in itself will contribute further to healing that part of the growth. Not to say it may heal it, there may be something else that comes up, or it may be a bit deeper, and so you got to keep digging like Tetris. You remove a block, the blocks might still fall down, but you could also clear it in one movement as well.
So how do we sort of, what I talked to you about timing, how do we sort of discern the difference between, oh, it is a timing thing, or it is actually something much deeper?
It's based on, you have to look at other areas in your life, and essentially there's a premise that the clues are all around you. So if let's say you're dreaming, there's clues in your dreams. So you're in waking state, dream state, and those who are fortunate enough to remember their dreams, you can interpret those, and there's a lot of clues in there from the subconscious mind. Jung's talked about that. In terms of the waking state, when we're in our day-to-day world, there's so many clues around. So in this instance, anything that represented your feminine child, or even the feminine wisdom around you, there'll be a pattern of this not feeling supported.
I think that for me, the most beautiful thing about, I feel totally feminine on the inside. Like my heart is 100% feminine. And but the way that that expresses itself is sort of untraditional. But I would say that in my filmmaking work, when I'm at my best, it's like my heart fully expressed. But the challenge has been, so the masculine side, the challenge has been that it's not felt supported. Like I haven't had the financial resources. I haven't had like literal physical support, like people to help me, labor. And it's really cool to actually go into it because it's like my core pattern. Like I feel like I've always been so creative and I've always worked really hard, but I never felt like I had support, and it started from a young age where it felt like people rejected. I chose to be a filmmaker and that was rejected. And then sort of every time I take a creative act and I move deep into my creativity, it's rejected by the outside world, and it's judged or it's put down, or I'm constantly told I'm not going to earn money from it. And then there are actual financial difficulties. And so what you're saying about the female not being supported by the male is 100% my experience. So yeah, going straight there and looking at that. And
So then what you can do with that is then just the first step is just being aware of it, because people go, oh, what's the solution? Now that I know this, what do I do? The first thing I find is the acknowledgement of it, awareness, and then you start seeing it playing out around you and just being more aware. At that point, and you're zoomed out, right? So you're actually like, oh, okay, that's playing out. So you're actually now not the victim of this, and you're not in the drama. You're observing this drama that you're in playing out. Acknowledging that further, then, and either I find that process dissolves it, or you actually have to actively keep going, like the Tetris block. There may be more blocks coming through because it's quite deep, and this may be, for those that believe in past lives, it may be a deep past life thing from 1,000 years ago, passing through your ancestral line, or it could just be from this life. It doesn't really matter, but it could be quite deep.
So I sort of wrote here that one of the things you've said to me is that it's about getting out of ourselves more and understanding there's a bigger thing happening here. And so this is almost a little bit about a worldview. You said framing things from another angle, which I really love. And every time I go to Reg with sort of 6 months into my journey with business, and there's another block, and then he helps me see it from another angle, to reframe it. Last year sometime we actually had this amazing conversation where you came to me and talked to me about some of the detail. So the thing about this method, it is very detailed, and I feel like you're very detail oriented. And one of the amazing examples you came to me with was a hotel of consciousness in a way, and it had all these different levels. There was the 3rd level, the 11th level of consciousness, and it was what prompted you with this visual was an interaction that you had with someone. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this story?
Yeah, sure. Just on the detail thing, I'm actually super simple. I actually have gone into the detail because I want to resolve one or two things, and what I find is it's almost like a tree. If you go deep enough, you move one block. I don't have to move 100 blocks, and that's the reason why I go so detailed into it. But once you remove that one block, once again, like a tree or Tetris, everything shifts, and it shifts quite immediately, actually. So it's just, that's my experience. I like things to be simple, and I've got the kind of analytical brain to want to go into it. So that's the detail.
That was a really that was really cool. Yeah, that was a really good summary, and I completely connect with that, and I
But you're
completely
right.
get
I
it,
mean, people do say, "Oh, this is complex," but that's why I just draw the analogy with the manual camera. It's like, well, yes, it is complex. It's hard to think about, to think about ISO and aperture and all these things. It's not easy for people to learn that. You're a master at it, but um, once you know it, it's so easy, right? Like for you now,
yeah,
taking
it just
taking shots
goes
and
back, and yeah, it's subconscious. It's all subconscious,
yeah.
and then it becomes intuitive. Yeah.
So this example, and I remember having the call with you because I was in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, I think, and essentially I had been aware of a period of my time, a couple of years, where I was actually attracting a certain behavior in my friendships and relationships, and it all had to do with trust. And I was quite bemused because I was like, why am I attracting people who don't trust and have often had, a lot of them had some childhood trauma or some experience. And I thought I've had an awesome childhood. I felt well supported, and what is the link here? And while I'd always ask the question, and naturally I'd want to say, oh, well, it's them. Like that's the most satisfactory answer. But I knew deep inside that it's always related to self. And I was aware that sometimes you can attract people out of a direct mirror, because it's happened to you. That you can attract people as an inverse mirror. So, for example, if somebody is abusing you, then maybe your lesson is actually about boundaries. So, in the first example, if someone's abusing you, then maybe you're also an abuser. In the second example, if somebody's abusing you, maybe it's actually the inverse, that your lesson is about boundaries and saying no. And then I became aware of a third category, which is an inverse mirror or a direct mirror, but at a subtle level. And this is where I think we were talking about it. And I was standing in this hotel, which it was an amazing hotel, and it had about 11 floors. And I remember thinking that maybe the people in your life, you can see it play out in front of you, but from your perspective, it's actually at a subtle level, and not so obvious. So even though I hadn't had an experience, so I'd just finished a healing session, and in that session, what had come up was this unconscious memory for this person about actually being abused by their father as a child. Um, and then they were able to go and get professional help after that. But I asked myself the question, why have I experienced this? I'm not some healer at some level that is not connected to this situation. I know that there's this relationship and mirror and something on my side, and I thought I haven't been abused. However, I did remember an example, then it triggered my unconscious memory of an example where I was actually vulnerable as a 10-year-old, and I could have been abused, but it didn't happen. But the system that was playing out between the masculine and feminine was just at a different level. So it was actually an experience to remind me that my feminine was in that situation, was in a potential situation, that mirrored that, not exactly, but at a subtle level. Yeah. So for me, it was around actually boundaries and on my feminine side, having clear boundaries. And often the pattern for me on my feminine side is acceptance of a lot of bad behavior, because that's just what you do to be patient, to be a compassionate human being. You accept any behavior and you'll absorb it. So for me, it was about a lesson of putting up boundaries and being clear about boundaries. But it was just interesting how it was manifesting outside through other people, but internally it was a very subtle mirror. So it was this thing of looking at the level 3 at the hotel versus level 11, and how you could see these parallel lines between these patterns.
Very cool. That was a really clear, that was a good description of it as well. I think that helped me clarify, yeah, the different levels and how they apply to each other. I think I also just wanted to say that I was I was actually reading this book on mastery, and it talked about Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution, and actually to examine or to get a sense of the bigger picture, he really examined the detail. He examined barnacles evolving over 7 years, and that allowed him to really tune in to this sense of the greater evolution at play. And in some way, I thought of that that passage when we were talking about, you know, this method of looking at our lives that closely and really seeing how we are connected. We're looking at the microcosm and we're really seeing the macrocosm. That's what's happening. So given that, yeah, how can people start to look at their lives in this way and basically address potentially like big blocks, and really see the block, really see why that vision isn't coming forward.
I think the first step is to actually understand the framework, and the framework is really those 6 characters around your masculine father that may represent authority, your feminine mother, your feminine self, masculine self, feminine child, which is that creativity, and masculine child, which is creativity as well. So that's the first step where you kind of break it down. Then after that, it's easy. Once you understand that and being a bit fluid on that, then you just let life kind of happen, and you start to observe things. Oh, this person walked past and spat at me, or this person walked past and said this, or I didn't get that job, or my sister did this, or my father, I don't have a good relationship with him, or so life just happens, and all the clues are there. And then if you're able to match that into the pattern, you start to understand that a bit more. And the other way is to also look at your ancestral line and just look at your father, your grandfather, your mother, your grandfather on your mother's side. And once you start looking at patterns, you realize that there's some real synchronicities between that, and you'll even realize why your mother and father got together, and how their experiences as a child were either a mirror or an inverse mirror, and why they sought each other, or why they came together. And yeah, it's really, really interesting to see it that way. You can do it through your dreams. So those who can remember their dreams and interpret their dreams, you get an understanding of what's happening in the subconscious. But it's really a day-to-day thing, and I understand the notion of zooming out and the 6 characters can be a little bit like, oh, why would I do that, and what does it all mean? But once you have that framework to view it through as a lens, you just start to hypothesize and test. You actually start to test everyday experiences. So, for example, a friend of mine called me up. He's on, say, $300,000 a year. He's got a job out of Singapore, and he's got a pattern. And every time he gets this great job, he wants to leave about 6 months later or 12 months later. And the challenge for him is he's always got these male bosses, and he's got this issue with masculine authority. And that's because his dad has always wanted him, or put pressure on him to be, he has to be a CEO, he has to be a general manager or whatnot. So until he resolves that, he's carrying that same pattern into his workplace, and immediately placing that pattern, projecting that pattern on his boss. So he starts to create this experience where he doesn't like it, and then he has to leave. And so it creates a lot of tension and distress and conflict within him, because he actually does want to go forward. But when we did a session, he actually revealed that he actually wants to be a teacher. So that's his real passion and what he wants to do. So he's actually taking on the expectations of his father. And my hypothesis there is, if we went into his dad's line, maybe his dad also had a similar experience with his grandfather, or with his father or mother. So you start to test these things, and you start to see where you start to project this into your life, and that's how we create our experiences, and that's where we attract people, almost framing them in that way. And until we zoom out, be aware of what those patterns are, we'll start to be able to shift our own experience.
Cool. That was really incredible to hear. And I think it actually naturally leads into what would happen if our society, what would happen if our society listened? There's this element of the way that, I mean, if I'm a representation of my business, if you're a representation of your business and you're blocked in all these different ways, but you learn how to unpack and directly consult those blocks, yeah, what would happen?
I mean, that's a really big question, because if you think about, it's a big thing. If you could be your best self, if you could be your, you know, unbridled, unrestricted self, what could you do? What are you possible of or possible capable of doing? So it's a big question, and I think massive shifts and change would happen in the world. But once again, it's just a reflection of what's going on inside. So I think for me, it always comes back to self. And if I ask myself, if I'm able to get those 10 or 12 relationships between the six characters optimized, what's possible? And what I actually think is, the more I do that, the less I have to do. And the less I do, things actually just happen. I start to meet people, people come into my life, or I start to meet, creative types, or investors, or clients, better quality. My life just gets a lot better in that way. You get an understanding of yourself, and I think there'd be a lot more support for other people. So my capacity to love is greater because I have a framework for myself. So I feel safe in that, and I know that how to navigate that internally. So there'll be a lot more giving, and if there's a lot more giving, I mean, with safety comes love. With love, many people have talked about the impact of that. That would be, and I mean, what does the world look like when everybody's giving and loving?
Oh man, very different.
What's your answer to that question?
I feel like I dream of it every single day. I have this feeling, I have this vision of my heart. I just really respect and believe my heart is the best thing in the entire cosmos. And I think all of us know that inherently. And I just feel like, yeah, a world of that is just this, it's just sweet, and it's kind, and it's fun, and we respect each other. We know, I had this, feeling like, we all know this at core, that it's just, we come into this life, you can do whatever you feel like doing, just don't hurt anyone. I feel like that was my baseline. There aren't rules, but there are guidelines. And I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, that's the guideline. I've always known that in my body somehow. Even before I had words for it, I just felt, we can do what we feel like, what we want, but just don't hurt anyone, or try not to hurt anyone. And so I feel like, yeah, I'm watching it happen to my life, to be honest. I'm getting to see just loving friendships, connected, like a connected network of family that are all revealed on the podcast now. And it's definitely, it's definitely been, it's just a miracle to watch it all unveil itself when you clear those blocks and have a look at them. And yeah, it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
It's like playing in the playground at school. Just what is it? What happens when you get to play?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the interesting thing about the practice is that I really sense that, I mean, it's all about leaders and then their businesses, right? And then societal structures. Because it's just incredible for every leader to really be this attentive and begin to, pull themselves out of their own stuckness. And yeah. And also realize, just additional stucknesses, with our families and whatnot, and unpack those and resolve those.
Yeah, and it's you'll start to attract people, work with people you want to work with. You'd be more aware of, like, if you're starting up a business and you're looking for a co-founder, what are the elements, what's playing out, what are you likely to attract. You can start to understand that a little bit more and just plan for and communicate those challenges. And the friction's fine, it's just more understanding. Having a greater understanding enables a little bit more fluid movement.
And also you do a bit of massage work as well. Can you tell me, the connection here between the massage work you do and this framework?
Yeah, sure. I've been doing it for a number of years. I originally started in Swedish. I learned that maybe in my 20s. And then when I went to Master Chia's retreat center in Thailand, he does a lot of stomach massage work, which a lot of cultures do, and it's based on the premise that our emotions are actually stored in our organs. And so I became super fascinated with that, in order to release negative emotion and then move energy through the body. And I think it's based on the notion that the cellular memory in our body. So if you have a trauma, or you have we store it in our body. And I sometimes, when I work on people, they see flickers of their past come up and images come up. So emotions are fine. Negative and positive emotions are fine as they're flowing through your system. But the moment they get stuck, it becomes a negative emotion, or gets stuck in the body. Sorry, could be stuck as negative or a positive emotion. And then basically the process of massage is just to release that back out. So as you're working, you're releasing that negative memory or positive memory, releasing it back into a neutral memory, a neutral experience, and then there's flow again through the body. And that's the tie back to Nadi therapy. It's about having the energy moving through those 72,000 nadis as fresh and frequently as possible. And it's cool in terms of DNA. I mean, we might have the mouth or the eyes of our grandmother or grandfather. So to me, it just makes sense that we also get passed on the non-physical attributes as well.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is also interesting about, and the way I see what you're doing is it's untangling the world. So I really see it about the relationship between leaders and oftentimes businesses or structures. So as we untangle ourselves, we're kind of untangling these structures that are all tangled up, basically. They're all tangled up and we've built a structure. But as we untangle ourselves and build cleaner, clearer, more congruent structures to our harmony, then, we end up, with a much more flowing society.
And that's one of the interesting elements that I think about a lot, which is, to what extent are you, if you untangle yourself, does your frequency change? Do you now become in a different place where you're not worried about the world and its untangled environment, or you're not affected by, the world and the way it's framed? Or are we always, is there that disconnect? And that, that's something I think about a lot, is to what extent do our inner experiences map the external experiences, and how much of the collective consciousness influences that as well.
Just for context, Reg is a very, very successful businessman and multicultural marketer. So with connections all over the world, international connections, and it's just...
I'm just playing.
He's just playing. I mean, it's quite astounding to watch from the sideline, to just see... he's just done a multi-million-dollar deal. He's connected. He's just reached out to a new, company, or reached out to Hollywood, and amazing things. How has, and there's such an ease there, and I really admire it, and hence why I always go to you for advice. How does this method and this way of seeing the world for yourself help you navigate these? They're actually really big connections, and And, you'll call me and you'll go, oh my God, Ella, we just had this we just had someone call in. We had this successful investor. We just landed that big client. And you'll talk about it in relationship to your own blocks. I shifted this thing and then this thing came through. So do you want to talk to us about how's it helps you navigate these big connections that you...
I hope I don't call you and just blow my trumpet.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. You got to celebrate.
I think I always talk about it in the context of what's shifted, because I always see that you tweak a little bit or you understand a little bit more, and then there's a difference on the outside. And certainly one example was where you shift things internally, and then, for example, boundaries or saying no to certain things, not accepting everything, and then the nature of your clients change. So I had an experience where we had our biggest deal, by not having that client, pretty much would have decimated the company. So multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I didn't really like the way that client was operating, and kind of the values were incongruent with us. So intuitively, one time I just said, no, I don't want to take this business. And 6 months later, they came back to us with work, and it was actually double. We ended up making double the amount of money, and the person had changed. So I started to realize that sometimes, being honest in my own decision making, or even knowing what that is, and not just being driven by money or certain other things. So now that I've got the characters and the framework kind of in my mind, I walk, minute by minute every day, and just observe, just watch, and it's a pleasure to see what comes into your life, what goes out, what patterns emerge. So it's kind of just a thing that now happens for me, subconsciously, and a little bit consciously as well. So it's just tuning in and just observing, really, paying attention.
So I just want to say thank you for joining us on this episode. I've felt passionate about doing this episode for a long time, because it's just incredible. Like, it really made me look at the crux of why things are unfolding, and watching how I push things away, and for the deeper reasons why I might be doing that. So it really does allow me to feel that much more empowered, that I can make a choice in my life, and I can move forward. And if it's not moving, have the ability to look at it much deeper.
That's really cool. And thanks for having me. And even the questions you've framed, it's really nice to kind of shine some light on it from a different perspective.
Thank you. And thanks for supporting me for all these years. Everything you guys see at the Atlas is so much to do with Reg and how much he's helped me.
It's very cool.
Yeah, I'm proud of it as well. I'll see you guys again next time. Thanks for joining us on this episode.